Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Slurve Q&A, Friday 3 p.m. edition. I am Chad Parsons, along with Katie Flower, the UTHDynasty.com and Under the Helmet podcast team. Talking some Dynasty, we'll talk redraft, DFS, just getting ready for the NFL season in general here. Everything's set up on the Slurve chat to submit questions, and you can also do that through Twitter and just for folks that don't know, this is going to be such a regular edition of a chance to really interact with experts here in a live fashion. Evan Silva, Davis Maddock have already opened the floodgates. Adam Levitan, Chris Raybon, they're going to be on at 4 p.m. Today after Katie and I finish up our show that's going to go near the top of the hour. And also, FanDuel's 2015 World Championship, Roman Edmond is going to join much more. So really check out the schedule because these chats are just an invaluable opportunity to pick someone's brain in the moment. You got decisions to make, trades, you're building out lineups. This is the time to really get that contact, I'll say. And so UTHDynasty.com is the place to go to find more premium audio content from Katie and myself, as well as all of our rankings and trade calculator, dynasty-specific material. But we're going to cover all of our bases here in this show. So feel free to submit questions along the way. But we're just going to have a discussion as we do every week on Tuesday evenings for the Under the Helmet show. And Katie, welcome, and thanks for hopping on with me for this discussion for Slurve this week. And this is I wanted to ask you a specific question about last night, which was Seattle Seahawks backfield. Christine Michael now backed it up with a second straight strong performance. Thomas Rawls yet to get into action. CJ Prosise is on the shelf. Alex Collins is sort of the de facto number 2 in these preseason contests, but everything kind of points to Christine Michael riding the ship, and now he's a player that's rising up, redraft, dynasty, everything, to now he's not really available other than shallow leagues. So kind of what's your take on someone that's, let's face it, been the knucklehead factor to this point in his career, but no one really questioned whether or not the guy can ball out with the ball in his hands?
Yeah, he's really looking good, and it certainly looks like he has that fire in his belly now, the part that was missing, the key component, and that's what Seattle needs. They've got a lot of talent in that backfield, but they do need him to have that attitude adjustment, and like I said, it certainly looks real to me. I've seen him in several trades this past couple of weeks, and also in some rookie free agent drafts. He's been moving up the draft board very quickly, and it's interesting. More often than not, people are going to forgive and forget.
Yeah, it's almost what have you done for me lately? It seems like no matter what, there might be that little ping, that little demerit that he gets because he's teased us before, right? I mean, I think at his peak for Dynasty, he was what, in the top 40, 45, 50 at his peak, and that was still kind of simmering behind Marshawn Lynch, but we expected him to take that lead role, and since he's underwhelmed, he's been on 2 or 3 teams, and now they've brought in the cavalry, at least in terms of bodies. I wanted to ask you this, is this the biggest thing of this? Is this just a negative for Thomas Rawls? Because what are your thoughts on him? Because redraft, he's like running back 15, and that's really risky to me for a 2-down guy now with immense talent competition from Michael.
I have not been touching Thomas Rawls in Dynasty, and I won't be touching him in redraft. That is just way too high, and like you said, it's risky. Not only was he an undrafted free agent, and he looked great last year, but then he was injured. They brought in so many people, including bringing C-Mike back and giving him that second chance.
Yeah.
And so he's already familiar with the backfield, he's familiar with the system and the coaching, and the coaches themselves have commented what a different guy he looks like. So I think, if anything, it will hurt Rawls especially. Yes.
I mean, to me, it's a crazy price tag, right? I mean, you're talking, even if he falls, this is a mid to later running back 2, and for a guy that has limited PPR appeal, because once Prosise comes back, we got to expect it. And Michael, he's been showing well, where he basically got 0 pass game opportunities in his last few stints with the Seahawks, but he's actually got some action, And I haven't watched the tape from last night yet, but he had a pass pro opportunity in week 1. So they're obviously trusting him more than in the past. And I think that's just key. And he's reaching his mid-20s, and this is a point where, let's face it, he's kind of out of options. Seattle was the only one really calling when he bounced around from, wasn't it Washington gave him a shot after Dallas? I mean,
Yeah.
he had a couple really short stints last year, and fortunately Seattle had a need at the end of the year that kind of brought him back, and he's been a good soldier ever since.
I just remember how crazy everybody went over the news that he went to Dallas. That's what everybody was waiting for. He's finally got a great offensive line, and then when he stumbled and stubbed his toe there, the whole entire dynasty community just let a collective sigh of, oh, here we go, and I just bought him for this, and now he's worth nothing again. So yeah, I don't trust Rawls at all. Especially with the way that Christine Michael's looking and with the other talent that they've got around him.
Eric mentions that Rawls is Davis Maddox poster boy this year. And so I got a question. If you do like Rawls, how aggressive would you be in trying to acquire Michael to cover your bases? This is potentially one of the better run games it has been historically, especially since Russell Wilson has been there. I mean, is this something where you're going to feel like you need to overpay, or is this just, I have Rawls and I should probably be trying to trade him away as opposed to get another back from Seattle?
Well, again, in Dynasty, if after the NFL draft that wasn't enough to get you to go out and buy shares of C.J. Prosise and Alex Collins and even C. Mike at the time for cheap and free, right? Yeah. And even 2 weeks ago when he had his first good-looking runs, he was still off the waiver wire free. And there was a mad exodus, people running to the waiver wire to get him. If you were a Rawls owner and didn't rush to the waiver wire at the first opportunity, or if you had blind bidding and didn't put 35% or so down, you're probably already too late. You're going to have to pay probably a 2017 first, which I hate saying that because that's, that running.
But if someone owns Michael, I mean, again, if you've owned through the lean times, you're kind of back to, I really want to see how this pans out, whether or not you dropped them in the interim and picked them back up with some promising news over the course of this offseason. So.
Oh, exactly. The people that have been picking him up either speculatively or keeping him through the thin times, they're going to want their return on investment or they're not going to sell.
And even shallow leagues, right? I mean, even if you're at 20, 22 roster spots, Michael's the type that you just can't drop him if you own him at this point. Even if it's tight, you got to pick somebody else, right? Because he's the type that he could take the role and continue to run hot. He looks better than ever. It looks like he's leaning down.
He looks really good.
And he still has the power. I mean, he's always been a naturally powerful guy, but kind of like Mike Evans, we've heard the reports that he shed some weight this offseason, and in general, for the bigger guys, that's a good thing. And so you got to pick other options. I wanted to ask, just looking around, one game that I did watch from last night was Atlanta, and they sort of had, to me, the Tennessee Titans of Week 1 in the preseason, where the defense didn't really show up. Cleveland's run defense was horrible. They were getting blown off the ball. As a result, everyone looked great. Devonta Freeman looked great. We saw Tevin Coleman have the burst, and then Brandon Wilds, who now, with Cyrus Gray playing well last night, they were sort of in rotation. Gray played a little later into the game than after they pulled Wilds. I wanted to ask you, between Wilds, Cyrus Gray, they both seem to have enough talent to kind of stick. Is this a situation where you could see one of them being valuable? Like if Freeman were to get hurt, do you think that would turn into another two-man rotation, or would Coleman get the full run if something like that were to happen in season?
That's hard saying. I don't know if Tevin Coleman has it in him to be the full-time 100% feature back without having somebody else take some touches away from him. I do like Brandon Wilds a little better than Gray, and if I had a deep roster, might stash him. But there's so many guys right now that are stashable. It's just a matter of who do you have on your roster already. If you've already got Devonta Freeman, then it makes sense to take the shot on Wilds.
Yeah, one concept, I want to get your thoughts. I don't know if we've specifically said it on Under the Helmet at some point, but the deeper the league, I'm more and more willing to kind of take shots and break ties and heck, even downshift slightly on talent to take other backs from the same backfield that I'm interested in, or I think could be unsettled, or maybe one injury away from a bigger committee. But basically, a Wilds or a Cyrus Gray, whoever ends up winning that number 3 job, I kind of, if I have Tevin Coleman, or if I have Freeman, I'm more interested in players like that in, say, closer to 30 roster spots, because they're ones that, are going to be viable, and yet if I just take a random player from another depth chart, I don't really have that connectivity factor.
Well, exactly. You're insulating yourself against injury. So, for example, Detroit backfield is another good one.
Yeah.
They've been relatively cheap all off season. So if you've got Amir Abdullah, Theo Riddick is looking excellent, and you want to stash him. You want to stash Washington, Dwayne Washington, and Steve Ridley, and Zach Zenner. They've all had pockets of looking pretty good. They all have decent talent, and so if you've got enough roster spots, 30 or beyond, I've got one where I've got almost the entire Detroit backfield.
Yeah, because there a lot of them are affordable. That's the thing. I mean, Riddick and Abdullah are still sort of round 2 value equivalency, which is round 2 equivalency. Matt has a good question. He says, wasn't Tevin Coleman the current Falcons front office draft selection, whereas Freeman was not? And
that's true.
I do track stuff like that where they have no allegiance. You mentioned Thomas Rawls, where I mean the no draft pedigree, it changes the construct of your contract and the allegiance, and you have almost no leash. You have to keep playing hot, keep playing well. I mean, Arian Foster is an example of taking it and completely running with it from that point when he broke out forward. I don't have a lot of other examples, but just they're on tenuous ground to continually prove themselves until they get that big contract as a low drafted, low pedigree player. And that's the point I made, is I feel last year their intent was Tevin Coleman be the starter, and he got hurt. Freeman played out of his mind for about a month, and they just kind of rolled with it. But Freeman looked good this week. He broke a touchdown. The lateral explosion is there. I just wonder if he doesn't run quite so hot, that it doesn't take much, because Coleman was a day 2 pick, and they certainly have plans. Usually a day 2 pick means at worst you're going to be a 60-40 or 50-50 committee guy. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the way that
That's
it went.
Expectation.
When it went down last year, and Coleman finally got healthy, Freeman was the guy. And so these guys, even though they draft them with high expectations, they're still going to go with the hot hand. They're going to go based on what they see in practice and what they're doing for them on game day. So if Coleman has been underperforming to date, and Devonta Freeman is starting off this year the way that he started off last year, it could be 50-50, 60-40 split, and unless Freeman gets hurt, but I still question whether Coleman could take the entire backfield load if Freeman did get injured for any period of time.
Yeah, he didn't really look comfortable, and they certainly didn't use him in pass pro and overt passing situations coming in as a rookie, but that's expected for a lot of rookie running backs, so that's not, but we will see. He definitely needs to develop and show that, otherwise he's going to always be viewed as, well, he's kind of talented with the ball in his hands, but he's not going to be a 3-down player, so what really is he? And shifting back to the Seahawks, we got a question from Jason. He says, does the fact that the Seahawks appear to continue a more pass-happy, up-tempo offense change your opinion on the running back situation at all?
I think they're going to want balance. I don't think that they're going to be the pound and ground like they were with Lynch necessarily, but they're smart. Pete Carroll is a great coach. That whole staff is really good about building up the defense, being strong. They're going to want to continue the run game, even though they're going to continue with the pass-happy, up-tempo offense.
Russell Wilson has been one of the lowest volume quarterbacks in the NFL, and he's performed quite well. I always say if he got even to 550 or so pass attempts, that he would push, and he could actually blow away the rest of the position and be the #1 overall quarterback. One of those huge risers. But yeah, I'm not detracted. I mean, I think you want good offenses in general. You want good quarterbacks because they're going to push and make more red zone trips. And let's face it, they don't really have a go-to red zone guy. So you got to plan. Just like Lynch, he got a glut of carries inside the 5 and 10 yard line.
Except in the Super Bowl.
Right, and I think it would stay to that. I think they would stay true, and whoever the starter is, if they're getting a 60, 65, 35 kind of split, that running back has 10 plus touchdown upside, and that's what you want. That automatically makes you a top 10 relevant, regardless of your. I mean, we saw with Rawls, he basically didn't get receiving work, and he was still in that zone last year at the end. Shifting over to the Browns, that was another game that I'm early on in my watching from last night, but I have seen RG3 hot. He knows how to slide. Good work with all the baseball training.
Boy, I'll tell you, those slides were looking good too.
Yeah.
Like without any hesitation, didn't get his foot stuck.
And he was proactively sliding, so he could have got, in the past, we've seen him try to get squeeze the rock for those extra 2-3 yards. Dude, you got the first down. Like Aaron Rodgers, right? He gets the first down, and then that's it. Let's move on.
Let's move on. That's right.
I converted, and now I'm going to throw the ball and not be a human bowling pin.
And that's what he needs to do. He's got to stay healthy.
He is speed.
Yep.
To pick up additional yardage past the first. He did that on a couple occasions. He had, I think, a 15-plus yard run and a 20-plus yard run, and it wasn't all that difficult. He did the pump fakes like we saw early in Washington. So. And he dropped the ball in the bucket. I was really impressed with the fluency and the comfortable appearance of that passing game for Cleveland. And the question from Dan is Terrell Pryor, someone that flashed in Week 1. Now we saw him beat Desmond Trufant, one of the better corners in the league, and at the top of the route. I think it was contested, and he was right there in his hip pocket. And then late in the route, someone, made a proactive play on the ball, and it wasn't the defensive back. So Pryor, all the physical tools. I kind of wonder about this depth chart because Josh Gordon could come back, ? And Corey Coleman is. You don't draft a guy in the top 20 to not be an answer, if not the answer, at least a answer. You've got Gary Barnidge, who I know you like, and he's coming off a strong year. How much production is there to go around in Cleveland? So. As you spin this around, what does Pryor need to do based on what he has done? What's his upside?
I am not going to trust Terrell Pryor in regular dynasty or redraft if I've got to pick him to start each week. But if I'm in a best ball, I want Corey Coleman. I want Terrell Pryor. I want, he can easily get those chunk yards. 3 plays for 90 yards
and one long touchdown.
Or right, exactly, one long touchdown. He's still working his wide receiver chops as a route runner. He's not a great route runner, but he does have the athleticism to win. And as we see against some of the better defenders in the league, I like the fact that RG3 has stepped it up with his running. And if you saw the combination of plays that they were running, Crowell was looking good up the middle, and then they would do the same play where it looked like they were going to hand off, but then RG3 would just bootleg around and be gone. And so it mixes up the defense and keeps them on their toes. And then you got a guy like Corey Coleman on one side and Pryor on the other side getting deep. They're going to maybe have a chance to make that offense tick.
Yeah, I did some historical study looking at basically the worst quarterbacks and the worst passing games, and what did they do the next year? And a lot of times what happened is you saw it was either a first-year quarterback or you saw a muddied veteran quarterback that just didn't play well. They were kind of a stopgap. And basically the rookie going into year 2 is a positive uptick, and also when you just get changeover or give the veteran quarterback another chance, these situations moved up, and we don't think it's substantial. But if you're the number 31 pass offense and you move up to 20, that's a big deal, and there's fantasy value there because let's face it, if you're 31, probably none of the receiving targets were all that viable, or they aren't held in high regard. So that's why you almost have to look at the bottom feeders and go, is there room for an uptick here? And I think both of us are saying yes. And best ball, like it's a big point. I mean, Eric said there's a lot of Browns that could be best ball viable. I mean, the running back situation too. Crowell looked good, but we're always kind of, is he really going to get enough usage because Duke Johnson's there and Terrell Watson is a question mark? there's a lot of moving pieces, and it may be hard to predict when you're starting lineups.
Right, and that's what I was saying earlier as far as I wouldn't trust them necessarily, but it does look like they are going to be able to move the chains, and that's a positive sign for the Browns in general and for the fantasy players to even consider them to become fantasy relevant.
RG3, this is another player that, let's face it, a wide range of oscillations in his career. I mean, he was a shooting star for a moment in time early on. Injuries derailed things. All of a sudden, it felt like the looks weren't prepackaged for him to make, and he had trouble transitioning to being a quote-unquote traditional quarterback. And is he going to be someone like Christine Michael that people have that asterisk next to? If he performs well this year, if the Browns do rise to, say, 20 as a passing offense, if he runs, I mean, let's face it, he could lead the position in rushing. No one would say that's not possible. So what does he have to do for people not to be skeptical, or will that stigma always be there for him going forward?
I think that you're going to get folks in Superflex and deeper Start 2 and Triple Flex leagues where they're going to not be skeptical because, let's face it, there's still at least 6 or 7 guys that have bigger question marks than him, and you've got to put your poker chip somewhere. So
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean he's definitely going to have relevance in a super flex or deeper format.
RG3 over any quarterback in San Francisco, right?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Or even the guys in LA.
I was going to say RG3 has a lot more upside and actually probably less downside out of the gate than either quarterback with the Rams.
Right. So I don't think people will start to come around on the Start 1 quarterback leagues, though. I mean, he's somebody right now that you can get cheap, and especially if you're doing MFL 10 or Best Ball or daily fantasy, certainly RG3 is going to be an option. He's going to be one of those cheap options that
your minimums.
Yep, exactly.
And yeah, you mentioned FanDuel or something like that. I mean, he's perfect because it's really about, can you get the rushing upside? Can you get a rogue long touchdown or two, and that pretty much buoys your entire day. And really, for those minimum price guys, you only need 2 plays, is what I'll say. Can you get a rushing touchdown, or can you get a 20, 30-yard run, and then can you get a long passing touchdown? And then pretty much you valued, you made your value based on a low priced guy just on those 2 plays. It's almost independent of anything else. But RG3 was what, a mid double digit round guy for Superflex startups? Does that sound about right?
He was anywhere after round 15.
Okay. I mean, yeah, and you profited today, right? I mean, just him being on the field and showing reasonably well for 2 weeks in the preseason. Honestly, he's probably up 2-3 rounds.
I think that owners that got RG3 post round 15 are very happy with what they've seen so far, and they may be able to.
McCown's playing late in the game, and you're also seeing Cody Kessler. I mean, honestly, the notes I've taken have not been enough to say that. I mean, there might have been buzz that, oh yeah, we think he could be the starter. They're going to give RG3 every single opportunity outside of horrific play / injury.
Right, and just the fact that the coach called it a few weeks ago before the preseason game that RG3 is our quarterback. Right. I mean, that says it all.
Yeah. That it's not a committee, it's not a competition going into the preseason.
They do not want to have any question mark. Yep.
Let's have them play the whole first half in week 3. Let's have them basically one drive or not play in week 4, and let's treat them exactly as such. Going back to Seattle, the curse in the chat, he says, will Jimmy Graham be relevant this season? So that's a piece of the passing game that doesn't get a lot of run because it's a kind of a wait and see. We didn't get to see a lot of vintage Jimmy Graham before the injury in Seattle. What are your just thoughts on whether it goes all the way back to the trade to Seattle, or this injury from that few recover and get all the way back to stardom?
I think that Jimmy Graham is an extreme luxury for a team that is very well-rounded and well-balanced. That being said, I don't think that Jimmy Graham is going to return to tight end relevancy the way that he was, where he was so dominating. He's not in New Orleans anymore. Yeah, I mean, in New Orleans, he was the main feature in the red zone. He was the guy, and it wasn't just a couple of catches a game. He was targeted heavily. He won't be targeted that heavily, and they do have other red zone options. So he'll maybe have some big games here and there. But again, if you've got to pick which games he's going to be the guy, there's other tight ends that I'd bank on faster.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Detroit Lions as a backfield that you just kind of collect. There's a lot of cheapies. And I noticed that Theo Riddick got strangely, I mean, he was running exclusively with the first team last night. And Riddick, they were giving him interior touches, and he didn't look natural. We know that's not his game. I mean, he needs to be a space guy. If he's going to be relevant and really peak for what he could do, it's going to be 75, 80 receptions, and it's not going to be a situation where he even gets probably 100 carries, traditional running back carries. So I don't know if they were just experimenting in that fashion, but I thought Ridley looked good, and actually Zenner played exclusively ahead of Ridley, and actually Dwayne Washington kind of mixed in with Ridley. And from what I saw in week 1, I'm kind of surprised of that movement where it looks like Ridley kind of played lower on the depth chart, because I thought he was the favorite, but it looks like Zenner, going into week 3, Zenner would be your top power back in Detroit, and Ridley and Washington are kind of battling it out for the number 4 spot.
I saw that too, and I'm disappointed because I really liked Ridley when he was in New England, and he doesn't look nearly the same guy. And right. I do like Zenner. He's looked good. Riddick has looked fabulous, and I did notice that every time I looked up, he was carrying the ball or he was getting a pass thrown to him. They were featuring him quite heavily. So
he wasn't effective though. He just looked kind of awkward inside. But I wonder, like, why don't you roll out Zenner, Ridley, or Washington with the first team? I mean, you had a golden opportunity there, and they were just needlessly giving Riddick. He made one good cutback, but just when you saw him follow the play design, I feel like they're not going to do that in season. So why waste those plays, those reps?
They maybe just
Jim Bob.
They just want to test him and give him every opportunity to prove that he can't do it.
Well, and where does this leave us with Ameer Abdullah? He's someone, let's rewind 12 months. He had the carry, right, or the game. I don't know which week. It was week 1, week 2.
It was early.
But all of a sudden people christened him. He moved up almost like we're seeing Derrick Henry. I've seen Derrick Henry move up into that top 3 or 4. And we saw Ameer Abdullah grace the top 4 or 5 last year, where he wasn't early after the NFL draft. So is Abdullah sort of I don't think he's as good of an interior runner as Ridley or Zenner. And then he's not as good of a pass catcher as Riddick. So I just always wonder if he's kind of lost in the middle.
Yeah, I think that he's almost fool's gold. Talk about somebody that I didn't think that could be an interior runner, Melvin Gordon, but he looked great in the season opener of the preseason opener. Let's see what he can do to follow that up. But he was pounding it up the middle and breaking it outside and doing a mixture of both and catching the ball. He looks like a resurrected man that has learned from his rookie season. He's less timid. He's being patient, and so if Abdullah could step up and do that in season 2, but we haven't seen him yet, so I don't know that he's going to have that similar type year 2 trajectory.
Right. Yeah, and if you're listening to us for the first time, I am Chad Parsons. She is Katie Flower. Both of us are on the weekly Under the Helmet Dynasty podcast, and you can find our premium podcast over at uthdynasty.com. And Another moving piece from week 1 of the preseason is that Charles Johnson looks healthy in Minnesota, and Laquan Treadwell didn't really get separation. He was playing behind. It looks like he's working with the second team. Could be a slow start for someone that many pegged to just kind of be in there and be right there with Stephon Diggs as the 1A and 1B for a stunted, at least at this point, Minnesota passing game. Is Treadwell... Are you kind of siding with the slow start equals try to buy him for 80-90% of what he cost in terms of rookie picks or price tag leading into the season, or is he one that that's if he can't sort of get to that point early, I'm kind of fading him because I was not more ecstatic about him before.
No, I expected him and Corey Coleman to have slow starts, and for that matter, most all of these rookies. This is not the greatest class to come around,
This is the
and
2014 rookie production coming our way, right?
right, exactly. So the expectations for most all of these guys were that they're going to be slow starters. It's a big adjustment. He won with the physical game in college, but he was the biggest, strongest of them all. And now he's in with a bunch of guys that can outbeat him in the physical aspect. He's got to learn how to step up his game and use that strength and get his position, even if it's just a pinhole. He's got to catch that ball, and he's got to muscle it through. I saw a couple of drops that he had where he didn't get any separation off the line, and nor down the way a little bit, and the ball got in there, and the defender had a pretty easy time just swatting it away. He's got to have more of that my ball mentality and move back to the ball and shield the defender and grab that ball out of the air. And so far he isn't.
Learn, right? I mean, he has to learn that
it's an adjustment.
Muscling and beating even SEC, but it's not just go down the line. These are all number 1 or number 2 cornerbacks for future NFL purposes. So you really have to. He's not going to get separation. He needs to be and realize every play is going to be contested. There's going to be someone right on his hip, and that's what I saw from his early targets here in the preseason. Is that he just seems like, if you're not going to be uber physical, you better get uber physical, because you're certainly not going to win and have multiple yards of separation to make a lot of clean catches. So he needs to be that big body, jump ball, my ball receiver. And yeah, I do think he could be a wide receiver 2 for fantasy. I don't see wide receiver 1. And I've been out there saying I was one of the lowest people in the industry on Treadwell. And whether or not, the workout numbers are accurate or not, I just didn't see. He put up like 11 yards per catch his entire career. I mean, why are we expecting it to jump way up and all of a sudden him not be a 15 yards and in type wide receiver in the NFL when you're jumping up the level? It just didn't make sense to me. Yep. So have reasonable expectations. But Charles Johnson, let's rewind 2 years. This guy was breaking out in the middle of the year, kind of like Stephon Diggs. He's big. He has a lot of prototypical traits, and for people that want to bury him just because last year he was a non-factor and injured in one way or another. So yes, they have 3 good or starting caliber wide receivers, and if they don't have a high enough volume, none of them may be more than wide receiver 25 to 30, and that may be Diggs, and he may just be a rotational, do I start him or not, and more towards a bye week plug and play guy for a better redraft type team. That just may be the reality. Mike Wagner, he comes in with a dynasty question. I know I'm late to the party, so maybe he's got his rookie draft coming up. But other than Ezekiel Elliott, what rookie running backs are good targets in dynasty? So we typically see a lot of running backs in the back half of round 1, the early part of round 2 specifically. Now that we've gotten a little bit of tape, it's months removed from the draft. Have you kind of recalibrated, or based on all the data we see from getting questions from subscribers and on Twitter, what's your play now? Like, if you had to make a recommendation on a running back at a price point, what would that be for Mike?
A running back, DeAndre Washington. He's still
I saw him go in the
early.
First round.
Well, I saw him go at 1.12, but for the most part, he's been his sweet spot has been 2.03 to 2.06.
Yeah.
And for that price point, I think that there's a good possibility that he'll end up usurping our boy Latavius Murray. So
our boy in air quotes for people that don't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, but do you think? Well, this goes a cascade question is. So say he overtakes Murray at some point, or Murray gets hurt, and Washington runs with the job, so to speak, for part of 2016. Shouldn't we be worried that Oakland just goes back to the well and says, if Murray's not our guy, and I mean, we still need other running backs, almost like Seattle, right? Even though Rawls did a good job, we need other running backs in the pipeline, and Oakland doesn't really have much talent there, so they could be in a position that he's a very short-term play.
Oh, absolutely. I
Okay.
mean, he was a fifth-round pick, and we've got uber talent coming up in the 2017 depth at running back, and a lot of it is dependent on who actually comes out, but there should be at least a half dozen decent to more than decent options, and I'm still not giving up on Kenneth Dixon. I think that he is another good dynasty running back. His price tag's a little bit higher, but he has been slipping towards the end of the first round now. At the beginning, right after the NFL draft, he was going in the 105 to 107 range, and now he's more in the 110 to 201 range. So you can still get a decent price, and I still really like Kenneth Dixon.
Yeah, and I just there's not a lot that you like. I will say a guy that who has been falling. I mean, heck, in an IDP draft, I got him in I think round 4 or round 5. It was ridiculous how far he was falling. Was Jonathan Williams? I
Mm-hmm.
think he's looked every bit the part. And some of these talented players that you're getting later on in rookie drafts at running back, you kind of have to wait it out. I mean, maybe they don't get the opportunity. Maybe it doesn't break their way in their rookie year, but you just kind of want talents. And I think we've seen someone like Josh Ferguson. I think the jury is still out. I watched
Yes.
he almost got force-fed interior touches in that number 2 role, almost like Theo Riddick did. We were just talking a few minutes ago, and he was one that I didn't really see that for him. I saw him as a space player, and maybe the Colts were just trying it out, giving him every opportunity to see what he could do. But he's a player that I really liked in round 3 of traditional rookie drafts that I want to see a little more. And I think the theme is going to be over the next couple weeks is going to be I want to see more, and few players are going to really separate in a positive or negative way based on what we see on tape. But I think Jonathan Williams, he looked the part. I mean, he looked like a balanced, powerful interior, stick his foot in the ground and explode up, win against contact, all those qualities you're looking for of a potential 3-down back. Maybe he's not dynamic in space. Maybe he's not going to be a guy that runs away from a defense, but someone that can win consistently within the 25 yards of the line of scrimmage. That to me describes Williams. Now, who knows? Carlos Williams comes back. McCoy doesn't get hurt. There's a lot of moving pieces there in Buffalo, but he's a player. He's just falling. People are seeing a crowded backfield. They're ignoring the talent. So that would be an opportunity in the later rounds, I feel, to exploit in rookie drafts now.
Yes, he's a longer hold, but Cream does rise to the top eventually, and you don't have to sell me on Jonathan Williams. I watched him
Right.
at Arkansas, so
Yeah.
as a
Every
Razorback
game for like
fan,
3 years.
yeah. So as a Razorback fan, I do know what Jay Will is capable of, and I agree with your assessment that he does look the part, and this game doesn't seem too big for him at all, and it's just going to be a matter of rising to that opportunity when that opportunity comes.
Yep. And we had a good question from Jonathan. And this is one that I'm sure we're going to answer in season a few times. I think I got it on the RotoViz mailbag show this week with my appearance. Is which running backs do you see as relatively insulated from the loss of value with the 2017s coming in? This is going to be a critical question and one that I'm sure we're going to have to help owners through because in season, if they're productive, it's always going to be the yeah, but kind of question. Are they good enough to kind of maintain this role and ward off competition, heavy competition that few depth charts are not going to be in danger, I would say, in the off season. So, I mean, off the top of your head, I mean, is the list under 5 running backs that are truly protected from this sort of onslaught of talent potentially?
Well, I think that David Johnson, Todd Gurley, Ezekiel Elliott, Devonta Freeman, and that entire backfield, I think
Atlanta
is fine. Atlanta's fine.
shouldn't be going towards it unless someone has a career threat. If Freeman were to have a career threatener, I mean, maybe, right? I mean, they got to bring
Yeah,
somebody else in, I would say.
right.
Okay.
I think that Denver, their backfield is pretty solidified at the moment just because of the
They gave,
contract.
yeah.
Yeah, I think Houston, Lamar Miller is pretty safe.
Le'Veon
Um,
Bell.
Le'Veon Bell, I think, is safe unless he does
Well,
another.
let's face it though. I mean, D'Angelo Williams is what 30. He's almost Anquan Bolton age for running backs. That's for sure.
Right.
He's
I mean, it doesn't mean that they
33.
won't take somebody, but I
I
don't.
gotcha.
I,
They
I think
shouldn't.
that Right, they'll probably go for the depth around the round
Well,
4,
Bell is a
round
free
5,
agent.
somebody,
Bell is a
or
free
an
agent.
undrafted free agent, because there is so much depth of talent there. They'd be silly not to pick somebody up.
Cincinnati, I would say
I
they
think
would be
Cincinnati's
unlikely
fairly safe too.
because Bernard comes back and Jeremy Hill has one more year.
And Hill has looked he's
He's
looked good
looked
so
better.
far.
He's looked
Yep,
better.
he's looked better. Who else do we have?
I do
Eddie
want to make a
Lacy.
note from the Cincinnati game that Rex Burkhead was running higher on the depth chart than he was a week ago and looking pretty good. He's been a player that's been underrated based on his talent level. People mostly just remember him from that playoff game where he had like 5 catches in one drive, and people are like, "Who is this guy?" But anyway, back to the question.
I think Jacksonville. I think T.J. Yeldon, Chris Ivory duo is safe.
Yeah,
At
they
least from
should
any
be.
major competition. Looking at the backfields,
Tampa Bay should be as well, right? I mean, they have 2
yeah,
solid guys that are both under contract for next year.
yep. I think
But other ones, I mean, I think Chicago is an interesting one that, I mean, they have a lot of quote unquote capable runners right now, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if they all kind of get washed out next off season and they just step up in the top 50 and draft a prototypical guy.
I think the Redskins are a prime
Yeah,
candidate for a potential
yeah.
there, and uh, New York Jets potentially, depending, because Matt Forte is just a stopgap, and
New
they've
England
got
could be
some.
another one. I
Yeah,
mean,
New
let's face
England.
it, right? They're leaning basically on LeGarrette Blount, and Tyler Gaffney has looked like a viable make the 53 type guy. But let's face it, they in general have been piecing things together, and now they have sort of a receiving role with White and with Dion Lewis, and a power role. So we always say, oh well, they could get somebody, and they typically don't, but
Right. They're
they
not.
could be
They're.
remarkable.
I think that they're more going to get somebody that would be a sleeper that slips through the crack in
Yeah.
maybe round 3, round 4. But as far as getting the big studs, Philadelphia would be in the market. Probably the Giants. Um,
Yeah, the Jets are interesting to me just because they have a lot of viable guys, sort of like the Bears, where I kind of view
yeah.
it. Forte's a stopgap, but Bilal Powell has been playing, kind of to the best of his abilities, what he could be in the NFL. He's mostly done that over his career. Kerry Robinson has some juice. But I just feel like they're another team that could go the opposite direction, almost like the Giants, right? I mean, they have a lot of viable guys. We'll see about Paul Perkins, but Jennings is over 30, and Andre Williams is trying to be a reclamation project. But all these ones with sort of some viable guys and maybe no one with overt pedigree and youth combination, those are the risky ones in my opinion
Right.
to hold all the way through.
Indianapolis could certainly
Yeah,
use, and
exactly.
possibly Cleveland, depending on how the season goes. Um,
So the real thing we're saying though
Carolina.
is all these situations we're referencing, if you do hit on a running back that you're starting during the year, really dial in on how much this player is helping you, especially from a dynasty perspective, because the sell window for producing running backs in season is strong, no matter what. I mean, they are going to pull
Yes.
way more than January 1. So you really have to say, this guy matters a lot. I cannot let him go. And I doubt that's going to be your answer in week 7 when you're rolling out, whether it's Rashad Jennings or that's the time. The time to acquire them is in the off season. The time to sell is in season, because you have to realize I can just hit on another running back.
Right.
Or you should have a stockpile, right, of 4 or 5 guys that you wouldn't be surprised if they do just kind of take something and run, and then you can roll them out for 2-3 weeks at a time, churn and burn,
Yeah,
because
and
it's not worth it.
a lot of people are going crazy over 2017 first round picks, and I say if those are too expensive, stockpile some seconds, because there's
Yeah,
enough depth going into that second round
seconds are cheap.
and seconds are where you really want to get your running backs in dynasty
Yes,
anyway. You
right.
want to basically get your wide receivers in round 1, and then get tight ends and running backs in round
If it's
2 and
truly deep,
beyond.
right? If it's
Right.
truly deep, you're going to get guys that slide, because the wide receiver class isn't looking like a slouch either. So they're going to be mixed into that round 1 mix. Heck, maybe even someone like Deshaun Watson, could be oh, well, let's take this guy all the way into round 1, even in start ones. So that could be so there's a lot of moving pieces that could force guys into the early second. But we know with running back, it's almost like Devi, as you like to say. You could hit from anywhere
Yeah.
with running backs. So that merge of you're getting a sliding talent that maybe went to an ambiguous depth chart, or you're getting an optimal situation with a talent that you think is good enough. And you can tolerate the price, right? If it's round 2, round 3 rookie picks, that's tolerable. When you burn on a questionable talent a round 1 rookie pick, that's when it really affects your franchise. Just like
I
an
agree.
NFL team.
Yes.
This is another follow-up from Jonathan. He says, are there any 2016s beyond Ezekiel Elliott that have the potential to earn their way to safe value? So we've been talking about all these questionable depth charts. Who has that potential to you, whether or not they kind of sit today with a lead role? Who could do something as a rookie that all of our prep leading in through the draft process, and now we kind of see if it breaks this way, and I think we actually answered this on Under the Helmet a few weeks ago or during the summer of if rookie running back X does this, are we going to be one to cash out, or just kind of this is what I wanted and I'm going to keep the talent and roll with them?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think that Kenneth Dixon could, with his talent, get and keep that position. They've also, because of what they have around him, they may not be so quick to draft another running back. They've got a lot of other needs. So he's somebody. I think that Henry could potentially hold on to his spot and keep it in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not the biggest Derrick Henry fan,
right.
I think that he could hold on and be safe against next year.
Absolutely. We're closing up. We got a few minutes left. Whether it's remaining this week or the big tune-up in week 3 of the preseason, what are some things, whether it's going to be tips for folks watching the preseason or specific players that you think are kind of critical watches for you in terms of your teams and just what you want to see on them either moving up the depth chart or, hey, this is maybe someone on the fringe that I need to see something. I need to see some movement, or else they're going to be probably on the wrong side of my cut line as I get ready for week 1.
Yeah, week 3 is typically a dress rehearsal for week 1, as far as they'll play their starters a little bit longer, a little bit more. They want to see how things have gelled. Guys that have been looking good, they're going to give them more looks sooner. So a guy like Zach Zenner, has he really eclipsed Stephen Ridley and Dwayne Washington? If he gets in there after the starters, then that's going to indicate to me that maybe I need to rethink my Stephen Ridley shares and even Dwayne Washington, because you can't necessarily keep everybody in that backfield. It's not realistic depending on the roster depth. I'm still looking at the Patriots wide receivers. I thought Chris Hogan looked really good, and he's definitely somebody I want to keep. But do I have a spot for Mitchell? Like, Dobson is just so up and down, and it's unfortunate that Mitchell got hurt because I was liking what I was seeing there. I think because he's on short-term IR, he can be stashed on IR and held and see into the season a little bit. But who are you looking forward to watching these next couple of?
Yeah, a lot of my notes have centered around running backs, just because one point I've made before is I want to see a player moving up. I want to see a player rewarded for playing well. That kind of shows the synergy of performance and support of the coaching staff and front office to warrant more opportunities. And I think that sort of gives us these kernels, these breadcrumbs that when we fast forward a month or 2 or even 3 months, when something happens, we all know there's going to be an NFL depth chart that turns to their number 3, number 4 practice squad guy. And I think there's probably value to glean from these early preseason weeks of a player moving up, and heck, maybe they go right back down and we just don't see them for a month or 2 in the regular season, but they gave us clues that they like this player. regardless of, they're not going to unseat the starter or anything like that. But I feel like these running backs, it's really worth tracking to give yourself a better educated guess what could happen. And it's about moving pieces. The first time, like we talked about Atlanta earlier. So let's say Devonta Freeman gets dinged up. They're probably not going to roll out Brandon Wilds or Cyrus Gray or something for 10-plus touches for the remainder of that game. They're going to go with Tevin Coleman. And so, but the next week, if he's questionable, that's the moment to pick up a guy. And there may not be clarity in the reports. I mean, it may be we need to go back to the preseason notes and say, who was giving more run earlier in the game and who performed well within the scope. And we may have that answer, and that may clarify a deeper roster waiver move that you get right as opposed to getting wrong, and then you pick up the wrong guy, you spend your waiver bucks, and then the next week you're dropping them because you guessed wrong. You burnt the money, you picked the wrong guy, and then it's a fight if the other guy's even available because somebody else got him for $1. And I kind of think this is what we need to be doing in the preseason. We need to be filling out our comment cards and our watch lists on these running backs because we know that in season it's a fight, and it's critical sometimes that you need a warm body, you need a guy that's going to get 10, 15 touches. And this is the time, I think, to take all of our notes and get things right. And people just kind of shrug and kind of go, these games are meaningless once the starters leave, and I say absolutely false, specifically at the running back position.
Yes, and that's another good point. Whenever there's any tiebreaker for who you're going to pick up off the waivers, the tiebreaker should go to the running back because they have the closest path to fantasy relevance because of the injuries that occur, and just it's much easier to sell a running back in season than a third wide receiver when you know that the other wide receiver is going to just be stepping back.
Correct. Wide receiver, I feel like it comes back more to talent, and running back is more about being the last warm body and opportunity a lot of times. And that's going to be a great closing point. So as I mentioned early on, I am Chad Parsons at Chad Parsons NFL. Katie Flowers at FF_Skyler399 on Twitter. And again, you can find us talking every week on the Under the Helmet podcast, which is over on iTunes. And it's the premium content over at uthdynasty.com, which I should mention, General Manager, you get all the premium audio content. It's going to be close to 200 podcasts in 2016 alone, and Katie is on quite a few of those as well as myself. That FanDuel.com/underthehelmet is going to be your way to try out General Manager for 12 months for free. I mean, this is the deal. So if you've ever been on the fence or you're hearing us for the first time, want to learn more, free for 12 months. And to reiterate, this Slurve question and answer on a weekly basis. Evan Silva, Davis Maddock have a show weekly. I'm going to be on weekly here on Friday afternoons. We've got Adam Levitan, Chris Raybon, who are on right now at 4 p.m. Eastern, and they're going to be on weekly. FanDuel, 2015 Fantasy World Champ, Roman Edmond. So many more great guests, and thanks to Slurve for making it happen with the schedule and running the great chat rooms. The chat over at uthdynasty.com runs with Slurve, as well as the smooth running chat rooms here on slurve.com. So wanted to thank Slurve for making it happen and for all of your questions this week on the question and answer period with Chad Parsons and Katie Flower.